Good question. I saw someone came in. Love Alpharetta. Do you still have a varsity up here? Unfortunately, they cut down the varsity. They did have a varsity in Alpharetta. It wasn't good. Wasn't good for my health. But now I have to go downtown for those good chili dogs.
Okay, Ken, I was going to ask, what is varsity?
Oh, well, next time you come to Atlanta, I will explain to you, and you'll
Okay,
have to have the full experience of the
okay.
varsity.
Well, chili dog, I think that gives a clue.
Yes, but think about it, a chili dog like the size of half of a Walmart. It just serves chili dogs and is incredibly packed and has a really good like orange soda that
Okay.
Andy's probably experienced. All right, let me just check one more thing. See if we're ready to go.
So good and so bad. Like so many things, Andy. So good and so bad.
Yes, totally. All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started, Jim. So again, happy Thursday, everybody. One of the things that Jim and I'd like to do here, at Blameless is really create webinars that are not about selling a product, that are really about just helping each other, because we're all going through different experiences. But, having seen hundreds, or even in some cases, Jim, I think we've probably seen thousands of companies. They're different companies, but often have some of the very similar problems. So we try to pick some of the problems that we see as common, share what we're seeing, share what customers are telling us. And today we're going to really hit, underneath the surface costs of an incident, because, I think a lot of times when companies think about incidents, sometimes it's after the fact, like you've underinvested. Maybe you've got a product that's super profitable, and you've underinvested and you're just kind of making money off of it. Or in other cases, maybe there's some tech debt that really is costing you a lot of money, but you're not looking at in dollars and cents terms. So we're going to kind of dig into some of those underneath incident costs, what we see as best practices to use in really data-driven approaches to what the costs are of incidents. And you really explain it not just to the technology team, but your business partners too. Is it really is a business process. So quick background on myself. Prior to joining Blameless around 7 months ago to join Jim, and and really in a space that I'm really excited, because I think incidents cost engineers a ton of time. They take customers, sales. It causes just a lot of friction. I think it's $100 billion problem. So happy to join that. Prior to that, I've done Google funded startups. I've done some other things that we've sold to private equity. Jim, you and I worked at New Relic during a really nice hyper growth where I think we went from 1,000 to 2,000 employees in a couple of years. I've also run large enterprise systems. So I was at Cox Automotive, maybe you've heard of Kelly Blue Book, Auto Trader, had visibility into all of the different business units, actually ran the support organization, among many other things, across the company. So really saw firsthand the cost of a $50 million 10-minute incident, what that could cost if you're not careful. And then back in the day was a founder of a little company that's still around, different name, web.com. So super excited to be here with you, Jim, again for this session, and maybe get to share a little bit about your background before we dig into it.
Yeah, thanks, Ken, and good morning, everybody. I describe myself as really a developer by trade, software engineer, and spent a lot of my career writing software and also taking call for that software. So carried a pager and have kind of seen it from that angle, but then had the good fortune of also managing teams and managing very large teams as well, and sort of understanding the cost of reliability to an organization kind of at the team level. And I remember in 2016 when Google wrote the book on site reliability engineering, and I think, Ken, we're going to dig into the details, but the truth is the cost of reliability really goes pretty deep. And I think these practices are just a really good way to holistically get on top of reliability. And it's not just about how you respond to incidents, of course, but just the site reliability is a very broad and powerful concept where it's from start to finish, full life cycle, every step of the way, making sure that you're designing for reliability and of course handling incidents and outages, and then learning from them and studying them and making sure that they don't repeat, right? It's a very, really good, strong practice there. And, I think the fact that, companies are embracing site reliability engineering as a holistic practice shows they do understand that the costs can be very high, even if they're not exactly sure whatever cost is. And we're going to get into it because we've really done some good thinking on this lately. But it's like, I think everyone knows there's a high cost, and they're willing to invest in things like SRE initiatives to basically help get that under control.
Yeah. I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and anybody that's watching the replay. Hopefully this delivers value to you in your business, regardless if you do business with Blameless. Obviously, Jim and I would both love that, but we want to hope, first and, top is that you get some value for your organization. I think these days, Jim, I think everybody was saying everything's a digital business. I think more companies increasingly are really trying to live and operate that way, where, software that works isn't just a luxury. I think about the pandemic. If we didn't have software running, it would have been a totally different experience. Basically, running software kept the whole economy going across the world. But, when outages occur, it's not just about that immediate disruption. There's a lot of hidden costs, right? And that's what we're going to discuss today. Let's kick it off, maybe Jim, turn it over to you. But let's talk a little bit about customers first, because I think that's one thing. There's direct, indirect costs, but when you have software and when you have an incident, it impacts your customers, and when you don't improve and learn from that, it continues to impact your customers. I know you've got some thoughts. Maybe you could share a little bit.
Yeah. Well, too often we get our lens on the world is the business that we work in. So it's like, how does an incident affect me personally? I'm an employee. I have this job I do, but I always like to take the altitude out and say, like, hey, look, your business is providing some service, or it's got something that customers are paying money for, and that's why you've got a job, is because there's money coming in. So I thought we would just start there and talk about incidents and the cost. So there's like the costs that you can then measure related to an incident, and those tend to be the headline costs. And in fact, you just mentioned a $50 million outage. Downtime can cost the business real money. And it can also, if it's commerce or something where business is transacting, there's costs there, but there's maybe SLAs where you've got to do payback or things like that, right? And sometimes, depending on what your service or product is, sometimes that direct cost can look very, very small, right? So for example, I don't know, if the IBM website went down, like, well, did anybody actually lose dollars? Because IBM's probably mostly SaaS services, and those are locked into 3-year contracts and blah, blah, blah. So it's like, oh no, it doesn't cost us that much if the website's down, right? So, but again, that direct cost is usually something you can look at. I think what's a little more interesting can be the indirect or the unknown costs related to what happens to customers, right? And this is where you get into things like, brand damage. You get a reputation that's going to impact your business down the road in a way that is really, really hard to measure. And, it's probably a fine line, Ken. Like, people expect some level of disruption with any service. We all use services. Sometimes they have glitches. But if it's a sustained disruption, it really sticks with you, right? And you're going to remember those times where it was like a very sustained disruption. And so, I think it's worthwhile, even though that can be a difficult cost to measure, to at least place some economic value on it as you're evaluating the ROI of different investments that you're going to make into your reliability efforts. That's not a zero cost to the business, and that can be difficult to estimate, but it's an important part of it. So those are just some ideas I have, and I don't know if you have any other ideas around the customer side.
Yeah, well, I think you're hitting on something very spot on, Jim. I've been in many boardrooms of big companies, and where someone might say, "Hey, well, they didn't buy it right now, but they'll buy it tomorrow because we have a business that they're going to buy it tomorrow." But like you said, that's not necessarily true, because if you consistently have similar types of outage, if you don't have continuous learning, if you're not doing retrospectives, if you're not communicating with your customers when there's an outage and telling them what's going on, if you're not tracking to make sure you fix those things, then you're going to have those things again. And what happens if a customer has repeatedly bad experiences, eventually they're going to find is there somebody else that they can buy that product or service from. And so it's one of those things that it might not hit you today, it might not hit you tomorrow, but it might be when that SaaS service renewal is, they've gone on to somebody else. So I think that hidden cost of customers, I think, is super spot on. And I think everybody should have top of mind. And I think you should calculate it. Like one of the things you and I talk about, I think that's one of the reasons why we put reliability insights inside Blameless, is how do you build dashboards? How do you build data so you can really start to view both the hidden, and unknown costs, and the known cost of an incident. But let's dig first into the known cost of an incident, because I think that's what a lot of times people are a lot more familiar with. I've got a few ideas. Certainly labor cost is one of them. You think about like when you have to stop the presses, everybody's stopping feature work, they're stopping tech that they're on a tech, they're on a bridge doing a call, that's it. But there's a lot of other kind of known costs. Why don't you share some of the ones top of your mind, and then I'll jump into.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my favorite cost that is known is probably how much time the team spends, responding to incidents. So that's pretty easy to measure. So, you have 6 responders, the incident took 30 minutes, right? And you can kind of work out that cost. And that's like a like number of hours or person years or something, right? But the truth is you have to staff against that. So if you have enough outages, you might have a team of, 5 dedicated to be first responders. And then of course, if you have other developers on call, they kind of get paged in, but maybe you have 10 or 15 or even 20 if you're a large organization. So you have to make sure you staff to that. But, to me, I think the more difficult cost is related to that, but it's those people who were probably working on other things and those other things were affected. So, if a team is working on an incident and they're working on the follow-up actions after the fact, that means they're probably not working on feature development or other projects that they were trying to get done. Maybe, if it's a development team, it's probably more feature or bug fixing. If it's an operations team, it might have been a deployment tool or a security thing, or switching cloud providers or spinning up whatever. Like, everybody's always busy. Your staff is not sitting around waiting for things to do typically, especially if you're running pretty lean and efficient. So these things are actually fairly disruptive, to sort of those things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's a lot of times, it's just like in software development, when you break a sprint, that's not free, right? There's a lot of costs to stop something in motion and restart, do something else. I think there's probably a couple of other costs that come to mind. And, maybe these are hidden, maybe they're known. I guess it really depends on the company. I know a lot of times if it's the engineering team, we tend to think about the software engineers that are impacted directly. They're fixing this. Of course, after that, there's capturing the metadata, figuring out what happens, running the retrospective, creating a do not repeat plan, all of that. And so certainly those are actual costs. But what about your customer service teams whose phones just lit up, right?
Yeah.
And if you didn't have good communications, I know that's one of the reasons why we were big on putting CommsFlow in Blameless. If you don't have good communications with your sales team, with your customer success team, then they're answering all of these calls, maybe not informing your customers the best way. If you think about, especially if you have like an enterprise sales organization, if there's an outage, think about the hundreds of calls that might occur to your sales team that they have to be educated. They have to call the salesperson back.
Yeah.
You might have service level agreements that could cost you actual financial penalties. You've got the cost of creating the communication, right? Making sure, and that's something I think we'll have some pretty interesting announcements soon. Stay tuned. But, how do you build good communications that are easy for the right person to understand, make that easier? notification costs, depending on what it might be. Those are all, I think, also additional, big known costs that many companies experience. Anything else top of mind to you, Jim?
Well, Ken, as you say it, I'm going to be a little bit snarky, and I think usually from the point of view of the engineering and operations team, all that cost is very much unknown. So I don't think they fully see what happens to the support, side of the business when there's a major incident. How would they know that, right? That's kind of isolated and hidden. But as I've sort of spent more time in a leadership position, and you get your head of support is kind of riding you about this incident and everything it's doing to them, you realize that it isn't just impacting your team, it's also impacting other teams. And even as a way to look at it, does the engineering team think of themselves as being on the front line of the incident, or is it really the support team is on the front line? Because the incident's affecting the customer, right? If there was no customer being affected, then it's like, okay, well, we can fix the system whenever we want. It's not affecting anybody. But really, your support team is on your front line with the customer, and they're hearing about it, right? There's no way people are not submitting support tickets. And then, this is a common one too. It's like, oh, okay, that was great. So you guys were down for 60 minutes. And I, as the customer, that impacted my business. So you screwed me. And now I want to get on a call in a week, and I want you to explain to me exactly why you were down and what happened, right? And I know you've been on those calls with customers because you've been in the hot seat and had to explain what went wrong. But truthfully, they're on the hot seat too, and they just pull you in to basically share that pain. So I don't know if you
could get really expensive and long. Just to give, I think my worst case example, I won't mention which company. We'll just say it's a large technology company had a hardware issue, but to customers, they don't care about hardware issues. They just care that your software's down. They don't care why, right? And I think we used one of the big SI partners to go do a full multi-month write-up just to show, because it was a really big deal that that piece of hardware had this very intermittent issue. And so it could get absolutely super expensive. And I think that your point is really spot on. One of the things that I talk about here is the difference between incident management and enterprise reliability. I think increasingly, especially for all the software leaders out there, for the operation leaders that might be here or listening to the replay, is you might have thought, okay, I want to automate this. It's really inefficient when things break. That's what the business that we're in, right, is automating, from breaking to communicating. But a lot of times people think incident management. How do I have some fancy Slack bot that really quickly helps me fix things? Well, that's just a small part. That's the technology part of enterprise reliability. What you have to do is you have to quickly fix it. You have to communicate in real time. You have to capture that metadata. You have to do a retrospective that captures all that metadata. You have to capture the action items, build a do not repeat plan. Then you have to make sure that that is done. And you have to have dashboards for yourself and your executives so that you're measuring what it costs. So for example, when budget time comes around, if you're underinvesting in a part of your application, look at what it's costing you. Maybe that doesn't make sense. Maybe you need to invest more. I think that's so important. Just want to challenge everybody out there to really think about things in a broader terms. I think that helps us be a better business partner to the company. All right, hidden costs of incidents. This is another one that's, as you mentioned, some of the things that's top of mind that sometimes people think about as hidden. But what are some ones top of mind for you, Jim?
Well, I'll go back to your business peers. Okay, so you're going to have a peer in support, and they're really on the front line for tickets and escalations from customers. But you also you have a peer in your sales leader, and I can tell you that sales is a very stressful job, and they're always looking to hit a number, and there's always some sort of activity in flight. And this is where an incident can impact those deals in flight potentially, right? And what is the exact impact? Very hard to know. So this is in those categories of unknown impact. But if you asked any sales leader, hey, have you ever had, an outage from the company that you were working for affect deals in flight? They would 100% say yes. And in fact, not only would they say yes, and you've got to make sure you're doing everything you can to support them, but they will actually also, I've found, be very supportive of you because of this, right? So, just going back to what you were saying, as you sort of really think about a larger reliability strategy in a more holistic way, and if you're in a leadership position where you're planning that, you will get a lot of support from your other peers in the organization who are like, hey, like I would love it if we invested more. Like I've never heard a sales leader say, I want to invest less in reliability, because they know that will impact customers, deals, renewals, right? Reputation, new business, word of mouth, like they know that. So usually your sales leader will be your biggest champion for investing in reliability. Now they also need new features and whatnot. But they will never take that trade off of, hey, look, I'm willing to sacrifice reliability for the new stuff. No sales leader wants to be viewed as selling a product that is unreliable. In many ways, you might just associate that with low quality, right? Nobody wants a low quality product, because if you have a low quality product, you're going to have to discount it. You're going to have unhappy customers. You're going to have churn, all these things, right? So you always want to have a high quality product. And then, of course, you want as many features as possible.
Yep.
So, as we're talking through it, that's like yet another angle on the business, but it's really hard to measure what that actual cost is.
Yeah. And we're going to talk a little bit later about operationalizing it. How do you make it data driven? Because, I agree, as the sales team, if you can give them data to show that, hey, if some investment was made, that maybe you could drive better reliability, or there's a certain set of tech debt that if you did knock that down, you're going to have this kind of result. That makes a huge difference, but it has to be data driven. That's why it's so important that you have retrospectives that, really are something that you could share across the organization. You should be able to be proud of it. Tells the story of how we're continuously learning versus, something that's some hidden document that's a history document. On the hidden costs, I think we hit on a lot of these. I'll just go through a couple of them, but we certainly talked about brand reputation and image, right? The repeated outages, especially if you don't have a continuous learning process where people are afraid. One of the things we love about the name is Blameless, is when you have a blameful culture, people hide from incidents. And when people hide from incidents, you never uncover what really caused it, whether using the 5 whys or different types of methodologies. We have a blog post on that, Aaron. Maybe if you could share that blog post from last time, just for anybody that would like to see some of the different methodologies for doing retrospectives. But it's really important that you don't have repeated outages of the same thing, right? You've got to make sure that we're learning. You could have negative press coverage. For some of us that run larger systems, you don't want a New York Times article about you having an outage. Customer churn, and a lot of times, keep in mind, many customers are under contract. So people think, again, oh, they'll buy it tomorrow. Like maybe, I've seen companies that have an auction site. They're like, oh, well, the auction didn't go off, so the auction will go off tomorrow. Or it's an e-commerce product. If they really want to buy it, they'll buy it tomorrow. Well, customers get increasingly different choices. And so if you keep pushing it with them, they will find some other place to buy that service or participate in an auction. We've talked about lost productivity, overtime costs, opportunity costs. What else could you be doing? Even as a leader, for those of us that have had big outages, maybe you're a software manager, a software leader, you might be reporting to the board. You might be talking to the general manager of a group. It's going to take a lot of your team's time, of your times. You've got compensation and refunds. If you don't have a well-designed system, you might actually have loss of data, decreased employee morale. Like if your team's getting paged all the time, all hours of the day on things that they want to fix, but no one's prioritizing that work, that's demoralizing. And the way to fix tech debt and the way to get things prioritized, again, I think is data. If you're public, that could impact your share price. future business, as you mentioned, Jim, there's always a sales deal going on. And if you have an outage during that, that doesn't bode well from getting that deal closed. Or even contractual penalties, because there might be, you have to give a full credit for that month. I went through a lot of things, Jim, but those are the ones I would do if that I think are spot on. Anything else?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to just drill in a little more to the employee morale one, because I had this experience when I oversaw a pretty large engineering team where they were really begging me to focus on reliability, and it took me a little while to get to the bottom of it. Because I remember as an engineer, my favorite times were all my time spent writing new code, right? So it's like, well, why does everyone want to focus on reliability when I know developers just love to build new stuff, like we just do. So, and of course, the reason is once a developer gets woken up, at 2 a.m. and realize, and then like has to deal with it and probably doesn't sleep. And then the next day they're kind of productivity shot, and still really the next day they're productivity shot. Sometimes you lose a whole week just from that, especially if maybe you're a little bit more finicky of a sleeper and like, stress or, overloads you, and they don't like it. And so they're problem solvers, and they're like, hey, that was a really bad thing, and I don't want to get paged again. And then they get paged again for the same issue. But their management is like, oh, no, like I don't want to fix that issue. And that's just really, really, really demoralizing, like you said, to live in a world where it's almost like someone's like sticking you with like a, electric probe every time you get paged, and it's like, late at night, unexpected, whatever. It's like, it's a shock to the system, and we don't like that. It's like, no, we want to stop that from happening. But then someone's like, no, you're going to keep getting shocked. So as anybody that's on call will, resonate on listening to this webinar right now. But, also leaders, I would say, you're going to gain a lot of credibility with your team if you can empathize with the situation they're in and help them get themselves out of it. You will be well respected. It'll set you up for success. There's going to be higher levels of morale, productivity, buy-in. But if a team is really saying like, no, we need to get on top of these issues, you need to let them do it. Like you can't fight against that, because that will really only damage your relationship as a leader with them.
Yeah, no, I agree. And having been a developer too, I think, and even giving it, and Jim, when you said that even the sales teams, I've actually seen sales teams give me their budget if I showed them the data where, with a little bit more investment, with a little bit more focus, we can do amazing things. And, I think about, even leading teams of different sizes. I used to have this thing I'd call the leaky bucket. And, I would talk to the teams. I'd say, hey, in a sprint, how much time do you waste? And they'd say, oh, we waste 30% of the time. And it's funny, as a leader, you say, okay, great, that 30% that you're wasting every single sprint, what would you need to fix it? And I remember one time I was talking to a team, and they were like, if we could have one sprint, then that wasted time would go down to 10%. So think about that as an investment. You got, 52 or 26 sprints in a year if you're doing 2 weeks, let's just say a full year. And they can invest one sprint and get 20% more capacity. It's a no-brainer. And again, it just starts around those conversations. What's the business trade-offs? What's the investment? Which I think is a pretty good tie-in to the next thing, is thinking about reliability as a competitive advantage, or, even a culture of reliability. And, I want to tee this up because one of the things that I really like that I think you did a great job at New Relic is, as companies have deconstructed the monolith, they've got microservices. And so now maybe they have dozens, some companies have hundreds of teams. And, what's broken becomes a lot more complicated, because it used to be the whole thing's down. Well, now maybe the login service is intermittently not working, or one particular report's intermittent. And sometimes, that's where it may take you a while to get there. You start to think, what's our service level objective for these things? But maybe you could talk a little bit about some of those stories and the culture of reliability. Like, what does that mean? And, how do companies start to implement that?
Yeah. Well, you sort of went through the progression that's happened in the industry. And back when code was built and tested and then deployed as a monolith, engineering teams were typically not on call. And, just like straight up operations teams were on call. And they had simple run books, right? So app is problematic, reboot app. Machine problematic, reboot machine. But that sort of style of building software was really viewed as less than optimal, like inefficient. And so things started to break up into services, and then teams could move more quickly because they were decoupled. And so development moved faster. Well, that created a problem for operations teams, because really operations teams now don't really have clear run books when there's an issue, because there's so many different moving parts involved. Services call services, and in very complicated ways sometimes. So then you started to see developers having to take call. Well, so now you have developers on call. First of all, they don't really know how to do it. They're not experienced in it. They're bad at it, right? They're not trained as operations teams have been trained over the years on how to do that. So typically they're bad. So basically you have a big setup for failure if you don't do this right, and you're at a huge competitive disadvantage. So if you think about you've put all your developers on call, and if you don't manage that properly, it's chaotic, it's stressful, and ultimately degrades their performance, and the efficiency of your entire team has now taken a big hit. So what do you do to get a competitive advantage? You basically, you need to think about operational excellence as applied to this aspect of your business. What does excellence look like? With reliability, it's a very holistic approach, right? It's an approach where, you may have the Google playbook partly, activated with SRE team, but they're educating and training the other teams. And maybe you do, game days, and maybe you do all this other stuff to basically keep everybody trained up and current and ready to go, so that when there are problems, people know how to respond. And then of course, like you said, what does it look like to have, don't repeat policies, where if there's an outage, the team does a retrospective, identifies work, make sure that gets done and prioritized. So that's really what excellence looks like. From when you deploy it and operate it, and that really does give you a competitive advantage over your peer group.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, even over the last couple of years, it's turned into the term observability. At first it was monitoring. I always remember when people would call it monitoring. I'm like, monitoring seems boring, but you think about observability is, I think, part of, I think that culture of reliability is, first is, if our system's not performant, we need to know it. Our customers should never tell us. That's one of the things that I used to always, and still to preach, is our customers should never tell us their systems are not performant. I think if you have a true culture of reliability, if you're finding out from customer success or your sales team that your system's non-performant, then I would just suggest there's probably some opportunities for improvement and making sure that is being done. If you have poor test coverage in your code base as a standard rule versus an exception, maybe that might be something you might look at from an improvement. But I think reliability is really saying, hey, we're going to make not an unlimited investment, right? Because you could certainly go overboard, but we're going to make reasonable investments to make sure that our code's well tested, it's well monitored, it's designed for failure. One of the things I used to love to say is you should never know the name of your servers. If you know the names of your servers, you've got a problem.
Pets versus cattle, I think, is how we used to talk about it. And, one other thing that I would say around culture, if you're looking to create a culture of anything, so let's say you're looking to create this culture of reliability, what does that really mean? Culture is not the things that you say, but it's the things that you do. So as an example, if you really make sure that after an incident, you do a retrospective and people review that, and you do it, you're consistent, there's reviews, there's checks. Okay, now you have a culture of doing a retrospective, right? Do you have a culture of making sure you follow up after an incident on don't repeat actions? Do you actually follow up and do these things? That's what creates the culture. It's not talking, it's not wishing, it's not hoping. It's actually doing. And then that instills in people something that talking doesn't instill, and they will pick that up and they will lean into that in other ways that you don't even notice, right? They'll think about code design up front. Maybe you don't even have a formal process there, but they know there's formal processes other places, and it's going to catch it if they don't do good design up front. Maybe they talk about scaling again up front before there's an incident. They get ahead of it. So a lot of these behaviors that you can get only come when you have that culture instilled, and the culture is going to come from very specific actions that you make sure are happening at all times. People can't, they can't get away from it, right? They have to do it. They know they're going to be held accountable to those things that are really important foundational elements of your culture.
Makes sense. All right. Let's talk about operationalizing, because somebody might be listening to this like, hey, yeah, that sounds great, but maybe I've never done a game day, or even worse, like I've seen things where someone buys some, simple tool, a fancy Slack bot, and it has some thing they call a round book. And then someone says, oh, it's going to execute SQL commands. Like, no, it's not. No one does that, but let's talk about, what are some of the things that people, should do if they really want to operationalize that culture. If you want, I'll start off with a couple, Jim, and then maybe have you jump in. I think, first, one of the big things is software is going to break. Things are going to go wrong. If you never have any outages, you're going too slow. Okay. The question is, do they impact your customers? If you do it right, you're going fast. But if you have issues, there are P3s, there are P4s, they affect one or two customers. And so how do you get there? And I think it starts with, observability. I think you should have a statement is our customers don't tell us our software's down. And sometimes that's going to happen. Great. So you're going to have an outage. You're going to have a retrospective where everybody's going to get together. And one of your do not repeat plans is add monitoring to that particular system. So you're going to have outages, just hopefully they're not as impactful. And when you do, it's a blameless culture. It's all about self-discovery. It's all about continuous improvement. So, when you have the outage and everybody's under stress, it doesn't help to have, and by the way, sometimes I've been tempted to do as an executive, because maybe it's a really big outage, but you need to let the teams have a reasonable amount of space, bring in the right troubleshooters to be able to solve the incident. It's critical during the incident that you communicate with all your stakeholders. Customer success needs to know what they should be telling your customers. Sales needs to know what they should be telling your customers. Fellow engineers need to understand, is this something that I should be paying attention to? I know, it's just a few weeks ago, we were talking to a large international streamer where there was one team that was working on a big live operational issue. They couldn't stream a live event. There was another team that had some issues and was kind of fixing it in a vacuum. There wasn't good communication between those two different services teams. And so that resulted in, the front page news of a multi-hour outage if they would have been communicating. So again, communication, engineering, sales, customer success, capturing the metadata as it happens, because you're going to forget in the heat of the moment. There's certain things that, oh, we had to reboot this server. Oh, this queue was filled up. Oh, maybe we're doing table scans, not a great idea. We need to figure out how do we not release codes that's doing constant table scans. That's going to be a recipe for destiny. But capture those metadata things as it happens, have that retrospective where everybody gets together. They've already captured the metadata, and then really build a do not repeat plan. It's not just about the timeline of what happened. Yes, that's really important, but it's about what can we do to make that not happen again? Because those are the things that need to get prioritized. And then I think it's about dashboarding those things. What's the cost? Where are the hot spots? And again, it's not blaming. Maybe you have one microservice that's hotspot after hotspot. That is not the team's fault. That is under investment. That is, feature factory. There's something underlying that. So having that, and then when you have the dashboards and data, then you can talk to your business leaders and talk about investments. Hey, next year, this particular system, maybe it's been keep the lights on, KTLO, but we need to invest more. And here's the business data. It cost us $4 million. So therefore, to invest $1 million, That would have made all of these outages go away. Now you're having a business discussion around tech debt, around additional investment, which makes life so much easier for engineering. Because if you don't have that data, it's hard to get that additional investment because no one gets the value that they're going to receive from it. I think that's it. I think, as leaders, focus on the continuous learning. A lot of times people like, what happened? What happened? What happened? Yes, that's important to learn for the future, but not as a blaming exercise. There's so much more, Jim. I know I probably don't feel I got you thinking of some.
Well, you drilled into a couple of things that I would summarize as, first of all, learn from what's happening to you and then take action to fix those problems, right? And this is kind of a universal leadership technique as well. So with reliability, do you know what's happening? What are you learning from it? So you've talked about metrics, monitoring, looking at different data, making sure that the learning is happening, and then action is taken. Just learning with no action, you might as well not have done the learning because you're never going to just make it better by studying it. You've got to actually study it and take action. So I think, what you talked about, you just painted a really nice picture of really practical things that you could put into place. So the beauty of these things is they're like pillars. I mean, you could even start with any one of them. You need to have observability and logs to troubleshoot. You need to be able to tell whether you're up or down and where you stand. You need to be able to measure these kinds of things. Okay, well then, how are you responding? Are you responding effectively? So looking at incident response and anything you can improve with that. Each of these things, you can put them in place one by one and they will begin to add up. And then when you eventually get them all in place, you have a really nice program that you've operationalized. The one other thing that I would add in addition really is to operationalize some of these changes, just make sure you have executive buy-in. So, if no matter where you're at in the organization, I guess even if you're the CEO, you might want to talk to your board. If you're going to really make a big investment, just get that buy-in. And, here's what we're looking to do. These are the investments we want to make. Maybe you have it phased out. So, hey, phase one, we're going to put these 4 things into place over the course of the next year. And just want to make sure we've got good buy-in because you're going to hear a lot about them. Because sometimes, it's like people start all this work and it's invisible to the organization and essentially there may not be full buy-in. It's like, well, what has the team been doing? Well, they're working on reliability stuff. It's like, well, we didn't hear about this. Whereas if you really make it nice and public and visible and you really communicate and get that buy-in, you're going to now have all these partners understanding why maybe some things are slowed down or money is diverted because you're making an investment. So just getting that buy-in also, I think, sets you up to be able to do all these other pillars that we've talked about.
That makes sense. And I'll add one more thing that really popped to mind what we just said is tech debt, in my opinion, is not a technical problem. And a lot of times if you talk to engineers, right, and having been an engineer, starting off in assembly, is they think about tech debt as a technical problem. And it's really not. It's a business problem. Why do we want to fix tech debt? If the reason is it annoys us because, the way it's captioned or some other thing like that, that's probably not a great investment. We probably shouldn't invest in fixing that tech debt. If you can't articulate it in a business problem, what is it going to do for the business when we invest in fix this tech debt? Then it's probably not a good investment. I think that's one of the things as leaders, I want to just challenge you to talk to your teams when they have an idea for tech debt is say, what's the business problem we're solving? Because that's the framework for investing in tech debt. The other part I just want to point out, and you hit this point where you said it's not just a research project, you have to make decisions. As you build this data, as you have retrospectives, as you have reliability insight dashboards where you can see what's going on and what it's costing you, you have to talk about it as a leadership team. You have to have some sort of structure, whether you could be at all hands, you could be at a leadership meeting. And some of the best companies in the world do this very repeatedly is you go around to the various owners and they talk about how they're doing on reliability. And it's not a blaming thing. It's not a shaming thing. It's exactly where you are. If you don't talk about it and it's under the hood, when it's under the hood, it's usually not addressed, at least in my opinion. I don't know if
Yeah.
you have some different thoughts on that, Jim.
Well, yeah, it's like anything. You shine a light on it, it's going to start to get more attention. If you're not shining a light on it, it flies under the radar. And look, everybody's busy, so you've got to make noise about it. And I've seen the companies that have the most success implementing reliability programs and being more holistically. Someone's making a lot of noise, and that helps it to build momentum and basically, get sign off and funding, and then we do it. So, if you're listening to this webinar and you believe in reliability, but maybe your management team doesn't, you got to figure out how to make some noise around it. Otherwise, you're going to come to them and say, "Hey, I've got this tool," and they're like, "I don't know why we need it. Like, what do you like? You came out of the blue." But if you really kind of put together a well-reasoned argument to a leadership team, right, with some data backing it up and things, it's like, okay, most rational people will choose this path of reliability. That is the most effective path for business. It may not be the most obvious, but investments in reliability pay off in dividends to the business down the road.
Yeah. And Aaron, if you could, one of the things we did is we built an ROI calculator, because a lot of times when you're thinking about the cost of reliability, it's not real clear. So Aaron, if you wouldn't mind sharing the chat channel, the ROI calculator, it's absolutely free. You can go, you don't have to buy anything. You can just see that. So it's the first step in having a business conversation is, what's the cost of reliability? How is that working? So we'll get that posted, and we'll also put that in the follow-up email. I think we're running close to the end of time. Jim, I'll just look real quick if there's any final questions. I know we hit on some of it. If not, feel free to email either one of us directly. You can connect with us on LinkedIn. You can email, Jim. I think you're Jim@blameless.com. I need to get that because I'm Ken, and my really long last name .GAVRANOVIC @blameless. But also you can just hit me up on LinkedIn. Glad to answer any questions. Doesn't have to be about Blameless. Jim and I both are about like sharing our many experiences and how we can help you and your company be successful. So really appreciate the time today, and look forward to the next time. Everybody have a wonderful Thursday. And again, if you've got other ideas for topics or special guests that we could bring in, let us know. We've got a lot of contacts and we'd be happy to.
This was a lot of fun today, Ken. Thank you. And thanks to everybody who joined.
All right. Take care, everyone. Have a great Thursday.